welcome to worship at First Universalist Church. It's so good to be back with you after being out of the pulpit for the last 2 weeks. And I heard we had some difficulty in the chat during the sermon last week, but that's not going to happen this week, is it? I'm looking at you. To that end, you may see us disabling the chat function today from the meditation or prayer all the way through the sermon. And so just to be able to center in and get centered into our worship experience together this morning. So let's just take a deep breath as we pause and arrive here for worship this morning together. And let us begin with a prelude from Howard Spindler. Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the spirit and to serve the community. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from this morning, we welcome you. And whomever you love, we welcome you. We welcome all of you. It is good to be together this morning. At the top of our service today, we acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door and part of the Haudenosaunee people on whose ancestral land First Universalist Church now stands. If you were here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. At the top of our online service, we want to just invite you to please remain muted throughout the service. When too many voices sing or speak together, it can create a cacophony of voices on our audio, which can disturb the flow and the experience of worship. As we gather this morning, we want to invite you to pop into the chat and to offer a greeting. You can find this at the top or the bottom of your screen with an icon of a text bubble and the word chat. So please pop on over and offer a greeting. It could be a wave of a hello or I'm here or whatever you prefer. Welcome, welcome, welcome to worship at First Universalist. This morning, my friends, we will join hearts and voices in singing, recognizing that even as we are singing muted from our own homes, wherever we are creating a song across our city of Rochester, across the country, and even across the world. So let us sing together this morning hymn number 1000 out of our teal hymnal, Morning Has Come.
With joy and sing a song of gladness. I rarely pass by a big oak tree without stopping to touch its bark. Under my hand, I feel the life force that runs through the tree, up through the tiniest branches into bright sky, and deep down through the roots into dark earth, and I feel connected to the source of life. Oaks have long been a symbol of strength and endurance. The prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible called the people who were filled with God's love oaks of righteousness. This week I stopped in the woods by a big white oak. It must be 200 years old. I pressed both my palms on its trunk, leaning in, letting it hold my weight, and I prayed for strength to accept change and to face what may come. We all need something and somebody to lean on. This church can be our oak tree, this holy space we create whenever we choose to connect as we are doing right now. The countless ways we care for one another, our faith in the power of love, these are pillars we can lean on. And here, may we find strength in our unique human ways to be oaks of righteousness for each other and the world. In the name of the love that makes us one, come, let us worship together. As we light our chalice, will you join me in saying our chalice words in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community. Please join me in our affirmation of faith, followed by our doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life, thus to be covenant with each other and with all. As the current pandemic unfolded, people hoarded stuff, medical masks, toilet paper, because they were afraid they couldn't take care of themselves and their families. In my case, it was elastic tape for making face masks. I've given some away, but I'm still holding on to more than I really could ever use. I hold on because I'm afraid. Fortunately, we can choose love over fear. In this church, we choose to build a community where we care for one another, trusting that others will care for us in turn. In the words of the familiar song, we all need somebody to lean on. Lean on me, I'll lean on you. In that spirit, let us give freely as we are able to support the life of our church. To give online to the First Universalist Church, please click the link in the chat or feel free to send a check to the church. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Good morning, friends. If you have little ones at home at this time, I would invite you to invite them into the room for our story today. Now, I, like many people, did not learn very much about Native American boarding schools when I was in school. I only learned more when my own children learned about them in school. And that's what our story is about today, about a grandmother's experience having attended a boarding school and sharing with her granddaughter what that experience was like and how it shaped her in her future. And I think it speaks to, in so many ways, how our early experiences shape who we are and our choices, for better or ill. I hope our young friends have been able to come into the room for today. I miss you so much. And maybe we'll be stopping by with a gift for you all soon. I'll be in touch. Our story today is When We Were Alone by David A. Robertson and Julie Follett. Close up of our picture. Today I helped my kukum in her flower garden. She always wears colorful clothes. It's like she dresses in rainbows. When she bent down to prune some of the flowers, I couldn't even see her because she blended in with them. She was like a chameleon. Newcomb, why do you wear so many colors? I asked. Newcomb said, well, Nusissim, when I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I wore many different colors. But at the school I went to, far from home, all the children were dressed the same. They gave us different clothes to wear. Our clothes weren't colorful at all. We mixed together like storm clouds. Why did you have to dress like that? I asked. They didn't like that we wore such beautiful colors, Newcomb said. They wanted us to look like everybody else. But sometimes in the fall, when we were alone and the leaves had turned to their warm autumn hues, we would roll around on the ground. We would pile the leaves over the clothes they had given us, and we would be colorful again. And this made us happy. Now, Newcomb said, I always wear the most beautiful colors. After I helped with the flowers, we went over to the back gate. There were vines covering the gate, and they reached all the way to the ground. When my kukum turned to fix the latch, I saw that her braid hung almost as low as the vines. It was like she had a tail. Newcomb, why do you wear your hair so long? I asked. Newcomb said, well, Nusism, when I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I grew our hair long, just like our people have always done. It made us feel strong and proud. But at the school I went to, far away from home, they cut off all our hair. Our strands of hair mixed together on the ground like blades of dead grass. Why did you have to wear your hair like that? I asked. They didn't like that we were proud, Newcomb said. They wanted us to be like everybody else. But sometimes in the spring, when we were alone and the grass had grown so long and thick in the field, we would pick the blades from the ground. We would braid them in the short hair they had given us, and we would have long hair again. And this made us happy. Now, Newcomb said, I always wear my hair very long. After my Cookum had fixed the latch, I followed her through to the birdhouse. There was a bird flying through the air like a jingle dress dancer. She fed the bird and whispered, Na pinesis, mitchaso, tamisikitean, tamaskayasin, which means, here, little bird, eat so you will get big and strong. And her words sounded just like a poem. Newcomb, why do you speak in Cree? I asked. Newcomb said, well, Nusism, when I was your age at home in my community, my friends and I always spoke our language. But at the school I went to far away from home, they wouldn't let us speak our words. All the children used their strange words, and we didn't understand them at all. Our voices blended together like a flock of crows. Why did you have to talk in their language? I asked. They didn't like that we spoke our language, Newcomb said. They wanted us to talk like everybody else. But sometimes in the summer when we were alone and our teachers weren't anywhere around the place we were, we would whisper to each other in Cree. We would say all the words we weren't allowed to say so that we wouldn't forget them, and this made us happy. Now, Newcomb said, I always speak my language. After our gardening work was done, I sat with my Cookum in the backyard. Her brother came over and sat with us. He comes over all the time. We drank tea and ate bannock. The tea was hot and sweet, and the bannock was moist and warm and melted in my mouth. My Cookum and my uncle talked and laughed like children. Newcomb, why do you and Nokomis always spend time together? I asked. Newcomb said, well, Nusism, when we were your age, at home in our community, being with family was the most important thing. We played with each other, did chores together, and shared everything. But at the school I went to, far away from home, they wouldn't let us be together. My brother and I were separated like day and night. Why were you and Nokomis separated? I asked. They didn't like when we were with family, Newcomb said, because when we were together, we thought too much of home. But sometimes in the winter, when we were alone, and we were sure that nobody could see us, we would find each other, and we would take off our mitts, and in the crisp, cold air, we would hold hands so we could be with each other. And this made us happy. Now, Newcomb said, as she reached over and held my uncle's hand and mine, I'm always with my family. Thank you for joining us today to learn and to grow together, to open our minds and our hearts. Amen.
Beautiful, Howard. Thank you so much. And thank you for that story, Rev Michelle. Wow. I want to invite you all now into this reverent time of sharing the joys and the sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like, you can place a hand over your heart to be able to listen from a more heart-centered place. As I place stones into a glass jar, I will read aloud the joys and the sorrows of our gathered community, and all are also invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat that we may hear from our community gathered here. This morning, we share a joy from Carol Hoffman. 3.5 weeks into the total hip replacement and finding recovery a very slow process, but it's getting there. Appreciate your caring. We also share a joy this morning from Tom Williams, who had a successful shoulder repair surgery on Thursday, May 28th, to repair a torn tendon. He's feeling good so far. We have a sorrow from Jane Hickok. Her cousin John Thompson died earlier this week in Florida after a long illness. We hold a sorrow from David D'Amico and Janice Mary Jones. David's 95-year-old aunt has tested positive for COVID-19 in a Louisiana nursing home. She is the family matriarch and the last of her many siblings. Dora Mae James, or Aunt Doe, as she was always called as a character. She had bright red hair, a strong opinionated personality that dominated all conversations. We just hold her in our hearts this morning. We share a sorrow for all those who are living with grief and loss and anger and fear in the face of so much Black death in our community. And I will continue to drop stones in the bowl as we share our many joys and sorrows in the chat. And as we drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all of the joys and the sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, may all be held in the heart of love. I want to invite you now to settle into a time of prayer and meditation. Take your hands away from the keyboard and just settle into where you are. If we were together in our space today, I would encourage us to let out a collective scream or sigh of anger and outrage at the Black death we are seeing across this country. So if you feel called wherever you are, I would just invite you now to just make a noise, let something out, to honor how you are feeling, to express it through sound, to know that other First Universalist community folks are doing this across our greater city, our country, and our world. Just let it out for a second. If you are tired, if you are outraged, if you are grieving, if you are surprised or shocked, if you have been seeing this and expecting this and are all too familiar, if you are overwhelmed, if you are fearful or worried, Let your heart rest here. Let your heart rest and be held here. Let the numbness fall. Let yourself feel what needs to be felt. Our country and our city are on fire. Our country and our city are showing how law enforcement and leadership respond to peaceful protest and outrage. Our country and our city has a past to own, too terrifying, too hidden, too explicit, and too broken. So just take a deep breath with me and settle into this fact. Racial injustice has been a steady part of all of our lives for every moment that we have been alive. Take another breath with me and settle into this fact. Racial injustice lives in our very tissues, whether we are on the receiving end of it or we benefit from it or some sort of a mixture in between. Take a deep breath with me. And settle into this fact. The country is on fire with a rage and a grief that has been silenced again and again and again and will not be silenced anymore. Take a deep breath. Let us settle in together into this fact. As a man named George Floyd lay in the street struggling to breathe, now we see those who protest in the wake of his death are being tear gassed and struggling to breathe. Waking up this morning with throats still sore. We bring our hearts to this present reality. We bring our spirits and search them to find answers as to what we should be doing to respond. We bring our minds to do the critical work of discerning which stories those with power want us to believe and which stories hold the truth of the people. We bring our truth to this time and we honor it. May we turn all that we are feeling, all that sits within us, into action. May we find our voice, whether our throats are sore from screaming or crying or tear gas. May we find our voices and raise them. May we tap into the power of the collective knowing that injustices this big and this long-lasting will take all of us to address. And may we remain present to the ways the past and current struggles for racial justice live inside of our bodies. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. We hold silence this morning to reflect on moments when we have remained silent in the face of injustice. We hold silence to remember all those who have been silenced through violent tactics and even through death. We hold silence, no matter how imperfect, to continue to be with our bodies and our feelings in this crucial moment in our country, to honor where we are. Let us join in holding silence together now. Our hymn of contemplation this morning is hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, a beautiful read, devastating, but beautiful. She writes in the introduction to this book, I have lived with this book for 6 years, starting over a dozen times before I settled on a narrative thread. Invited to write this Revisioning American History series title, I was given parameters. It was to be intellectually rigorous, but relatively brief, and written accessibly so it could engage multiple audiences. I had grave misgivings after having agreed to this ambitious project. Although it was to be a history of the United States as experienced by Indigenous inhabitants, how could I possibly do justice to that varied experience over a span of 2 centuries? How could I make it comprehensive to the general reader who would likely have little knowledge of Native American history on the one hand, but might consciously or unconsciously have a set narrative of US history on the other? Since I was convinced of the inherent importance of the project, I persisted, reading or rereading books and articles by North American Indigenous scholars, novelists, and poets, as well as unpublished dissertations, speeches, testimonies, truly an extraordinary body of work. The charge of genocide, once unacceptable by establishment academic and political classes when applied to the United States, has gained currency as evidence of it has mounted. But it is too often accompanied by an assumption of disappearance. So I realized it was crucial to make the reality and significance of Indigenous peoples' survival clear throughout the book. Indigenous survival as peoples is due to centuries of resistance and storytelling passed through the generations. And I sought to demonstrate that this survival is dynamic, not passive. Surviving genocide by whatever means is resistance. Non-Indians must know this in order to accurately understand the history of the United States. My hope is that this book will be a springboard to dialogue about history, the present reality of Indigenous peoples' experience, and the meaning and future of the United States itself. Friends, I'm just going to be real with you for a second. If this wasn't my third attempt to deliver this sermon, you would be hearing a very different message from me today. Guaranteed, guaranteed. But I set out to deliver this sermon to you all on March 15th, and lo and behold, that was our first online service. And then I set out to deliver this sermon again 2 weeks ago, and a worldwide Zoom shutdown conspired against this message. And today, I know that this is part of a larger commitment, a larger justice struggle. And it may just be that I'm stubborn, but I'm here to deliver this message with you all today at long last. Those of you who know me know that I am committed to the movement for Black lives. And you know that I am committed to working to end and address white supremacy culture. And we know that white supremacy culture is everywhere. It is in Black struggles to be seen and heard. It is in the very foundations of this country with enslavement and the horrendous treatment of Indigenous communities. I decided to go ahead with the plan to preach about Indigenous history and land with the caveat that you will most certainly be hearing a message from me about Black liberation struggles, interconnectedness, and our shared theology of social justice next week. So please tune in then. And if I could just be honest with you, it feels so raw right now. It almost feels hard to put to words. And I'm hoping next week a more eloquent and articulate message may come. And I have to mention to you that while Anthony and I attended yesterday's protests here in Rochester, socially distant in our cars, we saw many Haudenosaunee flags present with the people headed over to be in person at the protest. My friend Shane Creeping Bear shared these words yesterday. You can't really understand the United States unless you understand it as an ongoing and continuous settler colonial project built on slave labor. The moment you let that slip into the past, you're no longer understanding the current situation. His words helped me to see ways that exploring this history today might help to shed light on the current state of our country and the present struggle for racial justice. Its foundations lie in an Indigenous peoples history of the United States. It is so deeply important to interrogate the way we share our history. Whose voices are being included? What stories are being told? It is important because entire experiences can be erased. It is important because entire peoples can be ignored. And the perspective of scholarship is so key because, as many disability studies scholars first reminded us, there is nothing about us without us. I want to share with you all that this year's common read from the Unitarian Universalist Association, An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, broke my heart when I first read it through. It broke my heart around all I had not learned, around the deep violence and amazing loss that Indigenous communities had suffered in this country. And it broke my heart because I had not read anything like this before. To read it through was sort of a shock. As a white woman growing up in public schooling systems, we were shielded from this intentionally. You cannot tell the story of how great our country is while speaking of the mass violence my settler colonial ancestors brought to our shores. You cannot tell the story of Thanksgiving while having young children dress up as the Pilgrims and Indians, and also speak of the falseness of this story. The amount of land theft and broken treaties is astonishing. The amount of lying and deceit is also telling. These are the foundations of our country. And the practices of our past repeat themselves today. Yet this book is also about survival, tenacity, and relearning a new narrative about Indigenous peoples that focuses on visibility rather than erasure. This history has largely been ignored by many of us, myself included. And I really encourage you to pick up this book. It will break your heart and it will open your eyes and it will cause you to rethink everything you think you know about the history of this country. What I cannot do with you all this morning is to recount the richness contained in this book. What I cannot do is just go through it all because there's so much. But what I can do is I can tell you why it is so key that we explore this history in our church and what might be some inroads to addressing these horrible historic injustices. So much of the colonial conquest of Europeans who traveled to this country to flee religious persecution surrounds issues of religion. They are ancestors for many of us, not for all. These are the ancestors of our religion, for sure, folks who eventually founded Unitarianism and Universalism in the United States were part of efforts to Christianize these heathens and to grab land for their own use. Each one of our churches is built upon land that was once not ours to take. In fact, the idea of owning land was an entirely European concept brought from farther shores. And the battles that ensued over whose land it was led so many to so many unnecessary deaths and really tried the resiliency and the tenacity of Indigenous communities here. The doctrine of discovery is often cited as a source of religious land conquest, giving settlers the right to discover land and then own it. A statement founded on a 5th century papal bull, or on 5th century papal bulls, plural, as well as Puritan theology of a covenant with God to take the land for God's purposes. A doctrine that has been upheld to the present day and was celebrated as recently as 1992 with a 500-year anniversary of the first encounter with Indigenous peoples and European Christian settlers in the United States. We talk about this history in church because we benefit from the church's historical stance on land theft, Christianizing others who do not share our same beliefs, and the idea that some lives are less valuable because they have been deemed savage lives. We are complicit in the erasure of Indigenous peoples, often just by occupying the land we do without interrogating that occupation, and by believing that our religious tradition is somehow separate from this history of killing Indigenous peoples and putting Indigenous children in Christian-supported missionary programs like the one Rev. Michelle read the story to us this morning about. Programs intentionally designed to Christianize these children and separate them from their culture. Our Unitarian Universalist Association has asked us to dive in this book in advance of this year's General Assembly, a yearly gathering of Unitarian Universalists from all over, which was set to take place in Providence, Rhode Island, alongside an already planned celebration of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the Mayflower. It felt important for us to know this history and go into this situation informed because we were setting out to challenge this celebration, which is primed to erase the legacy of colonialism, the stories of Indigenous genocide, and the long-lasting effects of the violence that came from the Mayflower's landing on these shores. Now this year has shifted, and of course we will no longer be on site, but rather engaging in a virtual way with one another. I am interested to see how the acknowledgement of this history and its present day effects will still be a part of this virtual gathering for General Assembly. In the announcements leading up to General Assembly going virtual, ways continue to uplift and support Indigenous people in this country. There were ways that were also already sent out as alongside the invitation, specifically the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, who are still in a land dispute with the governing bodies of the state of Massachusetts. Petitions and actions were sent out, and I'll be sure to forward them to you all in this week's reflection email from me, so you have some opportunities to take action following this morning. We aren't just talking about the past. or the future of Indigenous peoples at church because it's something we should do. Perhaps this is your family or your community's history. And if you are not Indigenous, we need to learn about the history and the current movements of Indigenous people because we are so deeply interconnected. If anything, this time is a deep reminder of how interconnected we are. Because this history is the history of the country we share. Because these movements for justice rooted in Indigenous communities are about the environment and the earth we all share. Because the future we are building needs to be for all of us. Because a few weeks ago, when I was on a call with a local organizer who led our protest in downtown Rochester yesterday, I heard loud and clear that right now, this moment is calling for all of us to unify. We need everyone we can get, and we have to get on the side of the people. Learning about this history, learning about the futures to come, this honors the unity and the interconnectedness that each one of us is being called into in this moment, especially now. We have seen so many beautiful movements building around our country for land sovereignty from Indigenous folks. Sovereignty has been defined locally by the Onondaga Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee peoples, this way. Each member nation of the Haudenosaunee retains the authority to govern its own internal affairs. Within the framework of the Great Law and its own specific laws, each individual nation reserves the right to adjudicate internal disputes, pass laws for the welfare of their own community, assess fees, regulate trade and commerce, control immigration and citizenship, oversee public works, approve land use, and appoint officials to act on its behalf. To give just a tiny bit of history here, I learned in this book that the Haudenosaunee began as a vast federation of multiple villages and farms that was matrilineal. Resources were distributed equitably through the clan mothers. They also have a vast democratic governance system upon which this country's constitution was built. This history is United States history. Some of the claims to land sovereignty, to community or self-determination about what happens upon the lands that Indigenous communities inhabit have been under attack as of late. We are seeing this in times to stand up, to say, no, you cannot put a pipeline through our lands, like Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline. In Canada, with the Wet Sweat and First Nations, people who evicted Coastal GasLink from their lands. The efforts to take what little land Indigenous folks have been left with in our country continues, often with preference for big corporations and corporate interests over the lives and lands of Indigenous peoples. Sounds a bit familiar. We are also seeing this in modern day examples of Indigenous communities holding checkpoints at the borders of their lands because of the health crisis currently taking place due to COVID-19. These checkpoints have been publicly challenged, sometimes by bringing in local police forces. These communities have not been given adequate health supplies to address the threat of coronavirus, with cases of reporting that requests for testing supplies have been met with shipped boxes of body bags for the Seattle Indian Health Board. Shipped boxes of body bags instead of tests. Echoes of the past haunt Indigenous communities in the present day. Echoes of practices of germ warfare during Pontiac's rebellion on the part of General Jeffrey Amherst. Yes, the Amherst that Amherst, Massachusetts is named after. This rebellion in 1763. Echoes of land grab for resources, whether to build houses or pipe oil through. Echoes of promises ignored and dismissed so poorly that Doctors Without Borders has had to respond to the coronavirus epidemic in the Navajo Nation. Doctors Without Borders. Is anyone feeling overwhelmed yet? That is the heartbreak of reading this book, and the heartbreak of learning the truth around the current and historic struggles of Indigenous peoples in this country. It is truly overwhelming, and it is also so very necessary. Friends, I don't feel like I know much about this time period. It's so new. It's so new. But when I was speaking with this organizer a few weeks ago about collective efforts to address the challenges of our times, she was really speaking some powerful truth when she said, we are going to need all of us to get through this. We are going to need all of us to get through this. Injustice is everywhere, and it is overwhelming. And now, more than ever, I am convinced we need each other to get through this time period and to see the country we want to see on the other side. Now more than ever, we can explore this history, honor it, and plant seeds to take action. I feel the need to return to the words from my friend Shane. You can't really understand the United States unless you understand it as an ongoing and continuous settler colonial project built on slave labor. The moment you let that slip into the past, you are no longer understanding the current situation. And what a current situation we are finding ourselves in. Let us continue. Let us continue to learn about and honor Indigenous history as a community. Let us be a part of the current efforts to secure land sovereignty and to save our planet together. Let us be rooted locally as well as nationally in the truth that we are building a future together, and we will need all of us, all of us, all of us to get there. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. In that spirit of needing all of us to get there, our final hymn this morning is hymn number 1021, Lean on Me, a song written by Bill Withers, an amazing musician and someone who often walks the line of racial tension. This just feels like such an important message of togetherness for our time right now. We invite you to remain muted, to sing out joyfully from home, again, creating a collective song from wherever we find ourselves. Let us join in hymn number 1021, Lean on Me.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for I won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride, and if I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs.
Friends, just addressing a minor technical difficulty. Back to the meeting.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lean on. We all need somebody to lean on.
Friends, as I extinguish our chalice this morning, please let us read together the words printed in your order of service and on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. And though we cannot be seated next to one another, we are still connected in this community. As we come to a time to close our service, I want to invite you into an embodied practice of holding hands from a distance. So if you are joining us by video, please change your view to gallery view so you can see all the folks who are gathered here. Then reach out your hands to the edge of the screen. For folks who are here by phone, place a hand over your heart and bring to mind someone you love from this congregation. Friends, as we go forth into this day and into our country's future, may we be better informed by Indigenous history, the history of this country. May we be reminded this week again and again that it will take all of us to bring about the change we wish to see in the world. And may we not let the opportunity pass to dig deep into the past so that we may be part of creating a better world in the future. Go forth in love, in justice, and carry this out into the world that we know. And let the people of the church say, amen. As we come to a time to close our service, I invite you to follow the benediction with the words, I respect Indigenous peoples and lands. Please join us in typing these words into the chat together as Howard plays our postlude.